Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Hosting Your Own Webinar, Increasing Communication and Collaboration Between You and Your Members. My name is Isa and I'll be your facilitator and co-presenter for today's event. Now, I would like to welcome Sarah to kick us off for today. How are you today, Sarah?
Hi Isa, I'm great, thank you, and welcome everybody to today's very special association-based webinar. Today it's really about webinars themselves, and I'm very conscious of the short amount of time that we have, so I'll do my best to condense a lot of this into a 30-minute period. So just quickly, just a bit of an overall thing what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to be talking about the benefits of webinars. We're then going to start right from the beginning, talk about how to plan your webinars, how to market, how to do the right topics and get people to convert and register. And then we're also going to go through an example and tell you how to make money and also gain sponsorship out of webinars. So first of all, Isa, I would just like you to launch a poll. Just want to get to know you all a little bit better and get an understanding as to who is on today's webinar. So this is really how many webinars have you hosted, and people have a variety of responses there, Isa?
Yeah, so there's 4 options there. There's number 1, so none, I don't know where to start. There's under 5, there's between 6 and 10, and over 10.
Great.
So you can see quite a few responses coming through.
So what we can see here, and just on this is a polling feature. So for those of you who are interested in webinars and increasing interactivity during webinars, this allows us to ask, receive and share feedback based on the people who we're actually talking through. So as we can see, 76% of people have no idea where to start, which is interesting and great because we're really going to start from the beginning today. And for those of you who have hosted maybe between 6 and 10, over 10 or even under 5, hopefully you'll still get some tips on how to enhance what you're currently doing. So thanks for that, Isa. We'll close the poll now, and then just a reminder, any questions, please use the chat box, which is located on the bottom left corner. And what we're also going to do is we're going to close down the webcams, and what this will allow us to do is to increase the size of the presentation and allow you to focus on the presentation, not necessarily our faces. So let's just do that and let's get started. Great. Okay, so first of all, what is a webinar? Really simply, really just want to talk about this visual representation. So webinars are really a one-to-many communication tool. So as you can see here, you may have your presenter at a computer or maybe at a conference or a live event. That information then goes over the internet and can be delivered to your members either from their home, outdoors or office. So really cross-platform integration, being able to access it on your iPad, your Android, your iPhone. I can see Anne-Marie online. I can see a little phone symbol next to her, so I can see that she's actually logged in from any device. So she could be anywhere right now. So in terms of, why and the benefits of delivering these types of online events, we all know that, we want to reach our members and engage them and interact with them. But the possibilities really are endless. So consider them as revenue-making opportunities or professional development events. I think probably around 80% of the association not-for-profit based webinars we run are for compulsory professional development. But also, they're an opportunity to cross-sell. So think of product launches. Think of, a live conference that you may have coming up, and we all know you all have them. Think about using a webinar to promote that. So just keep that sort of stuff in mind as we go through how to actually host webinars, and maybe there'll become some light bulb moments for you. So let's get started then.
Yeah, definitely. So right from the beginning, you have a topic, you know what to say, but where do you actually start, Sarah?
Yeah, planning is incredibly important, so definitely recommend before doing anything, get a piece of paper, get a Word document, get a notepad, get an Excel spreadsheet and write the fields topic, presenter, date, summary, and then take the following into mind and just be prepared for your program to change. So once you've got everything on paper and what you want to do, consider the following. So what days are going to work best for your members? If you're in the legal profession, maybe the days might be a little little bit different for those who may be in the health space. The time, many members may prefer the evening, whereas some may prefer the morning because they may have different things on. And public holidays as well. So we've fallen into this trap before, haven't we, Isa? Yeah. Just make sure you look at the calendar in advance when you plan your webinars. Don't do it on a public holiday or the day after a public holiday. It does sound self-explanatory, but it does make sense. And, you know, we recommend, and we'll go into this a little bit later, but really surveying your members. So if you're unsure when to have your webinar or what time to have it, send an email out and ask people. It's not going to hurt. It's going to help you launch a program, and it's going to show people that you actually do care. Now, the registration process as well, so really important to think about this. So, you know, will it be a paid webinar, or are you going to offer it free as a membership benefit as well? And if you are offering something that is paid, do you have an e-commerce site that will tie in to your webinar program or your platform? And if not, there's many third parties that you can use. And then think about email marketing and how you're going to promote this and the field you're going to use. We'll go into registration pages shortly, but, you know, you don't want to have a lot of fields for people to register. People online who are registering for something or are in part of the buying process generally have a very short attention span as opposed to those who may be purchasing a live event. And this is probably the most important one, so let's just stress this, your plan B, and we all know Murphy's Law. So really think about your plan B and the whole what happens if. So internet connection. If you're hosting your webinar from an internal site or maybe your office, are people going to be downloading a lot of things? Are people going to be on wireless connections? And then also think about your audience. So if you've got rural and remote members who maybe won't have the best internet, and we don't know what's going on with the NBN at the moment, but if they don't have the best internet, what happens if it goes out? So at the moment, the technology we're using is a hybrid solution. So what that means is we're speaking, and then what you're actually doing on the other end is you're actually listening either through your computer or from your telephone. So everyone knows how to use a telephone. A plan B is great. And technology, always get training. That's the number one tip. And content and format. So always think of this before you choose your provider. So don't go and choose a provider and then start planning the content and format, because what happens if your provider won't accommodate what you need to do? So think about engagement, think about dual presenters, and think about what sort of tools you're going to use throughout the webinar. And then also think of your exit strategy and try not to leave this to the last minute. So once your webinar is over, now what? Many providers have what we call an end marketing URL. So what this means is once you close down the webinar, you can redirect people to maybe a survey, maybe your website, maybe your future conference, or maybe anything else that you're trying to promote. So they're the top 5 things that you really should be taking into consideration when planning a webinar. And I know we only have half an hour, so we won't go into too much detail, but any questions, please type them in and we'll get to them at the end.
Really important things to consider there. So now moving on, you've got the planning portion of your webinar organised. So how do you get the word out?
Okay, well, I think that associations are quite lucky in that members are always looking for new and innovative ways to learn, and the latest research conducted by the last webinar we had with the ladies from Survey Matters, and also the Membership is Dead report by Belinda Moore, talks about younger members and the fact that they're eager to learn, and they're eager to learn through different ways of online learning. So there's a great opportunity there, especially, you know, if you are using an online platform, you want to try and keep as much as your marketing online to increase your conversion rates. So let's talk about dedicated emails. So they're really common, but that's because they work. So just be careful not to send your webinar too far ahead of time. So if I get a webinar invitation, and I know Isa gets a lot as well, if I get one 2 months out, I don't know what I'm doing in 2 months' time. And to be honest, hopping online and putting my email address in to attend a webinar isn't that much of a big effort. So I'm probably going to forget about it by the time it comes around. So we recommend 1 to 2 weeks out is perfect. Also with your emails, try to use dedicated emails. So bury in your, and there's a difference between passive and direct marketing, but bury in your webinar invitations into a newsletter that has 20 other things in it. Doesn't tend to work. You can do that, once every few months or once a month, or maybe use your journals, but dedicated emails and dedicated marketing for these events generally work, especially if it's a new thing. And also keep in mind, make a big deal out of it. Why not? It's something new, it's something fresh. We've got clients that use multimedia. So we've got this one client and he's filmed a promotional video which actually talks about why people should attend his webinars, and that's on his website. That's also in the emails that he sends out as well. So get creative. Social media now, definitely, as all social media people say, you only use this if you have in the past. So if you've never delved into social media and you're starting a webinar program, don't just do it for the sake of it. But if you do have social media in place, groups are the best way to do this. So LinkedIn as well is a great thing. Great way to use it. And then we've also got Facebook groups as well. So really think about social media and how this is going to work for you. And your company website. So this really falls into the passive category. So when we say passive, we're talking about it just sitting there in the background. And then we've also got the direct marketing, which is what we're doing now. So really think about your company website, how you can use that and how you can brand it. And then dedicated series. So if you are doing a series as opposed to one, maybe think about how you're going to launch that. Are you going to send one whole email advertising all the upcoming webinars, or are you going to do them individually as well? If you're going to charge for it, are you actually going to do a bundled package? We know that everyone loves a bargain, so definitely think about that. And partnerships. So use your partners to promote the webinar for you, or better yet, use your presenter to push out the invitation to their network as well, especially as a lead generation tool if you are trying to recruit new members. So when you're doing this, and we'll go into sponsorship in a moment, but be sure to convey the benefits and even consider co-branding. So we've got some partners that we work with. I'm not quite sure if Stephanie is on this webinar at the moment. And we actually co-brand the webinar invitations to our webinars. So definitely something to think about there. And once again, think about passive direct, so and make sure this is all sorted out in the planning stage as well.
Of the webinar. So moving on.
Yeah, I think this is something we call sexy and sticky, and this is standing out from the crowd, especially with email marketing. So you want to be that person who sends an email and people open up and they want to register straight away for it. So here's some examples just quickly, and here's a difference. If I get that email invitation, that's not really going to stand out to me. So here are some ways that you can make these stand out. So using the word how, very, very powerful. It conveys to people that if they join, they're most likely going to learn something. And the whole register now really gets people's attention. Remember, you want to create urgency, which is another reason why you only want to send your webinar invitations about a week or two prior. Asking people questions, so are your roses the best they can be? That's another powerful way to get people thinking and really encourage them to join. Numbers, they work wonders. So think of odd numbers as well as those in multiples of 5, so 11, 7, even 10, so the 10 Commandments and those sort of things. And also negative headlines. These will actually surprise you. So test a subject line and see what works best and mix it up between negatives and positives. Once again, depending on your audience, and see what happens there. And this one, so growing roses, the myths, the facts, and what you need to know. I think that also creates some urgency. And these have been tried and tested, but once again, it is going to depend on your database. So test, and see what people come back with, and then measure and then refine it, I guess. So now I'm going to hand it over to Isa and put some pressure on her. I just want to take you through some of the visual elements, and she does a lot of our graphic design here at Redback. So let's talk about the good and the not so good examples, and maybe if you are doing something similar to this, then share your thoughts with us. But if not, hopefully you'll be able to see some see some examples here.
Great. All right. So looking at this email invitation, it can actually make all the difference if you have it done really well. So the current example you can see on the left is very text heavy. There's no images besides the logo on the top. There's not much spacing, bulky paragraphs, no clear call to actions either. So if you're sending a text-only email, that's completely fine. It's a completely different story. But for those who always send HTML emails, this looks a lot better. So have a look at the one on the right, which will pop up for you quite soon. All right, so this one is a lot more clearer for the series. So it doesn't necessarily have the company name. There's a brief summary and some clear call to action, such as register here. The what's in it for me is also important and should be clearly defined with bullet points, so people are drawn to it. I also think that pictures add a really nice touch to emails, and it puts a face to the presenter's name. So it's quite important to have visual elements to your email.
Yeah, and once again, it does depend, I guess. If you regularly send text emails to your database and they're used to that, then that might be a little bit different. But just quickly with Camilla, what does it look like on mobile small screens? That really comes into responsive design. So a lot of email platforms are now going down that path in terms of responsive design and creating like one banner as opposed to different sections. Would you agree with that, Isa?
Yeah, that's definitely correct.
Yep.
Yep.
Great. Now let's just touch on registration pages as well. So people get the invite, then they click to register, and then what should come up? Not this.
Definitely not this. So in my opinion, it just looks horrible, like a complete nightmare. So way too many fields and information that really isn't relevant. You don't really need that. Now, one thing to remember or keep in mind, make it easy for people to register and then capture further information during your webinar with polls or chat functionality. Also, we sometimes use the registration links through our social media channels or our website to invite people to our events. So imagine redirecting them to this only. It wouldn't look that appealing, would it? Alright, so this example on the right tells us a bit more about what the webinar is about. So it reminds them why they are joining in the first place, and will pretty much not take any more than 20 seconds to complete. So it's clear, it's simple, it's clean, and it's quite attractive as well.
Yeah, great. And there's some consistent brand in there as well, which is great. And I think, like Isa said, if you are going to put just a link, so you've got an email, which is fine, but then you've got a link to a registration page. And if you're going to be pushing that out through social media and other avenues where, these members, potential members could be seeing your registration page for the first time, you want to leave a bit of an impact and have some brand in there as well, don't you?
Definitely. It has to be quite familiar. It's getting people familiar with your series and having everything consistent.
Great. Okay, now before we get to questions, and Camilla, great point, only ask for data that you need, minimise the friction, and just with fields even, consider using drop-down boxes to give people options so they don't have to think too much. I know you don't want people to think too much, but sometimes, the difference between 5 seconds and completing a form can mean all the difference. So I just wanted to go through a really brief case study. Like I said, we've got 10 minutes left before Q&A. So really just to talk about one of our stellar clients. And many of you may have heard of the Australian Veterinary Association. So they represent veterinarians, funny enough, across Australia, and their mission is to really help benefit animals, the community, and obviously their members as well. So membership has always been a huge part of the association, and it's definitely part, increasing their membership and getting their members engaged is definitely part of the reason why the AVA chose to run webinars over 2 years ago now. So they've got members located nationally, which means that not all of them can attend their conferences or workshop. So their aim really was to bridge a gap and offer all of their members the opportunity to continually partake in professional development activities, obviously at an affordable cost. So they kicked off their webinar series, really excited. They, it was early on, we're talking 2 years ago now. So one of the things they really struggled with was the topic. So they'd done as much planning as they thought they should have, and everything was ready to go. Now, they thought they had a very few amount of registrations, and they did. They had around 80, so for some people that's huge, but comparing that to the size of their database and their open rates, not very large at all. So they really wanted more. So they went out there and they obviously put 2 and 2 together and realised that the part of it was really about the topics that they were selecting. So they went out there and they surveyed their members, which is what we just spoke about. So they surveyed their members, and here is just a little bit of a quote from Monica, who ran these webinars. So our major challenge was choosing the right topic. We decided that the reason why we saw so few numbers was because we chose the topics for our members. Subsequently, we decided to survey our members and ask them to provide feedback as to the topics they wanted. Once we had the right topics, it was then a matter of finding the right presenter and offering it at the right price. So they decided to do that, and in turn, as we said earlier, their registrations actually increased by over 150%. So in terms of tips and some other things that they did, sponsorship, something huge. So Monica really recommends to plan your topics and speakers in advance. So when you're going out to sponsors, have a plan and have something concrete. So a lot of people are still quite new to the whole webinar thing, so your sponsors might not be familiar to them. So maybe show them examples of a webinar in the past, or show them the goals that you're trying to achieve from the webinar. Just do as much as you can to avoid muddy waters between you and your sponsor. And also know your limitations. So going out there to your sponsor with a proposal and saying, okay, we can have your logo here, we can embed it here, and we can have the presenter give you a bit of a plug at the end. Well, what happens if your webinar provider doesn't allow you to brand the platform the way that you want it? What happens if you can't actually put logos where you want? And what happens if your presenter isn't willing to do a bit of a plug at the end? So really be clear and really go back to those planning stages at the beginning. And another thing they did as well, which is interesting, is they also offered the webinars complimentary to their webinar, to their members, but then they actually charged a nominal fee. I think it was like $20 or something to people who weren't members. So also a lead generation tool there as well. Now, one of the other issues they came across, and this is very common, is presenters. And we've done research on this, and people really say to us, having the right presenter can make or break it. Presenting face-to-face is completely different than presenting online. So really consider that when you speak about the training and when you're selecting your presenter. So really offer your presenter as much help as possible, and also be prepared for reluctance. With their presenters, they tended to find that people were a little bit reluctant and they didn't really know what they were doing. So that really came down to training them on the system. So find someone who's willing to train you on the system, and they had cheat sheets for all of their presenters, almost like a little mini handbook that they'd give them. So Monica, she made sure she knew how to run the platform as well. So you have your event manager, but also having someone there who's part of the organisation and knows what you're talking about can definitely make the difference. And then, up by 150%, which is huge. And we're talking the largest webinar they had with 365 people online, and that was a 70% attendance rate. So that's fairly huge considering the average is around 40%. So, here are her top tips. Topic selection is crucial, and if you're not sure, ask people. They use their online event calendar and select publications, so they didn't go out there and bombard every single publication that they had. And they repeated that key message. So keep it strong, keep it targeted. And going back to these dedicated emails, they sent messages 10 days prior. So email invitations 10 days prior. And then the day before the event, they sent a last chance to register. So if your database provider allows it, once you have people register, send another email 9 days later to those people who weren't able to register or didn't open the email, change up the subject line and see how that works. And then consistency as well. So same day, reinforce the message and get people thinking about that. So that's their story, and hopefully that sheds some light on, how people have done it. And, don't be afraid. Obviously, you're going to come into situations and accumulate great A/B testing lines. That's exactly what we're talking about there. Don't be afraid. You may run one, you may run two, or you may do them for 2 years like these guys did, but you're still going to be refining what you're doing. And there's so much research and so much knowledge that's coming out, especially within Australia, about how these online tools work. You've got plenty of help there. So that sort of brings us to the end, and to be honest, haven't even really scratched the surface of webinars. That's the highest level overview that we can give, especially for those people who are looking to delve into it for the first time. But I do want to go to some questions to make sure that we provide some feedback to you guys. So do we have any coming through at the moment?
We do have a few. So we've got one from Alicia. She said, how would you manage a dedicated series with the issue of too much lead time? Now, I think you asked how much lead time, and she responded with, we were thinking of a series over a 12-month period tackling issues in our sector. Would you just date claim the first one and then advise that there was more to come?
That's interesting. So we've actually had our own experience in this one, and like I said, it might be different for you and your audience. So our business skills series here at Redback, we do 2 webinars a month, and at the beginning it was sending out webinar invitations to people, and people started to see, it's on the same time and whatever. But what we decided to do is, what we found is that people will register for one, and then they'll want to register for more afterwards as well. So we decided to let people know that it's there passively. So on our website, on our social media pages, we encourage people to share the word and share the experience, if you like. But then we also have an upcoming webinar page where we have the next 2 webinars that are coming up, as well as the current one. So that way people can see what's coming. And then also dedicated emails as well for each webinar. We actually send it 2 days in advance. And what you could even do is have that upcoming webinar link in as many places as possible. So people, if they want to register for more, they can. What I do recommend is something we didn't touch on here for series, and getting people to turn up, because you could have 500 people register, but if you have 20 people turn up on the day, then it's a little bit hard to try and justify that and call it a success. Add to calendar iCal invites, and they're really easy to create. So when people register for an email and they receive a bounce back autoresponder saying here are your details, get them to add it to their calendar straight away, because I know on a Tuesday morning when we send ours out, I'm not the type of person that's going to be filtering through my inbox to say, oh, when's that webinar on? I want something to pop up in 15 minutes reminding me of when it's actually coming up. So hopefully that's given you some assistance there. And it also depends on any journals or publications that you use. So it depends on your current marketing activities, but don't try and do something too out of the norm. You might alienate some people or shock them. So try and stick to what you're currently doing, but just sort of work it in there.
Great. All right. So we do have another question from Kelly. So do you have suggestions regarding selecting the right price point?
This is an interesting one, Kelly. We have organisations that run webinars, so managed services, and they use their own e-commerce platform, and we have people that charge anywhere from $20 to $350. So it really does depend, totally different ends of the spectrum, and that's because it depends on the professional development that you are offering, if that's the reason why. But then we also have organisations that do maybe a large-scale webinar, which is like a broadcast. So they'll have a live event, their conference, the annual conference, and they will then broadcast the keynote sessions or the panel discussions live over the internet, and they will charge maybe 15% off the live attendee price or something like that. So I think you need to look at what you're actually charging for your live events, and then maybe work on something a little bit cheaper for the actual online component. But don't go too cheap, because also take into account people aren't having to travel or pay to travel to get to your event, so it's much more cost effective that way. Then also not having to take time away from the office as well. So a few different things depending on the type of events that you're running, but definitely I'd probably say like a 10 to 15% discount off what you're currently doing for your live events.
Great. All right. So moving on to Megan. Besides surveying members, are there any other suggestions of ways to develop topics?
Yeah, so once again, I think it depends on the association that you are, and if you can just type that in there as well, that would be great. I think, Camilla, you've just touched on a good point, hot topics, getting feedback from people, and in the exit survey that we direct people to, we always ask, what future topics, because people are on a webinar and they're thinking, oh God, I'd love to know more about this, or I'd love to know more about that. So really start capturing that information while it's fresh in their mind as well. So teacher professional association, okay. So once it's fresh in my exit survey, a great way to do that. Think about one thing that works great in webinars is research. So if you've conducted any research in the past, any sort of study or anything like that, people love it. People don't like sitting there looking through large, or some people do, lots and lots of pages of research and information. If you do a webinar, give them half an hour, show them some really funky infographics or pictures or graphs that explain what you're talking about. Talk about the research, talk about why you did it, talk about the results. That works great. Also, curated content. So content is huge now. So look at what's happening in your industry. And it really depends. We recommend finding topics and then choosing presenters. We have a few people that do it the reverse way, so it totally depends on you and how you want to work around it. But if topic selection is important to you, and that's really the theme of what we're talking about here, really think of topics that are really hot in your industry and then go searching for presenters and go searching for experts as well.
Great. All right. So this is from Matthew. Is there a limit to the number of attendees you would recommend for an interactive webinar?
That's a good question, and once again, it really depends on what you're trying to do. So the webinar that we're doing here today isn't as collaborative as most. So we've got polling, we've got Q&A. However, if you want to take it one step further, so that will involve using a whiteboard, for example, and getting people to draw and annotate and type in their feedback on a graph or something like that. I would probably recommend, if you are having that many people online and you do want the audio as well, so right now you can only hear us, but if you do want other people talking on the other end and you do want it interactive, I would say no more than 20. But if you do want it more like a one-to-many experience like we're doing now, the options are endless. It's just as much how much preparation are you willing to put into it, and how much time with Q&A and that sort of thing are you willing to. And just on that, I do understand that it's 12:32, so I do understand we did say 30 minutes, and we also understand that we have some questions coming through. So for those of you who do want to leave, I'm more than happy to stay online, by the way, to go through any final questions. Please click on the arrow on the top right, sorry, not the arrow, the cross. So I'm pointing to it at the moment. It's a blue cross, and that will take you out of the web conference, and then you'll be redirected to a survey. So please complete that, and if you do, we'll send you a copy of the recording and also some other white papers and handy tips and the full case study with Monica. So thank you for those of you who have to leave, and hopefully we'll see you at future events. You'll never know. But okay, just going back to these questions now, just to get back to those, Isa.
Definitely. So this one's from Megan. From your experience, Sarah, so do presenters normally get paid to present in a webinar? If so, what would be an appropriate rate?
This is something that's tricky, so it depends what the webinar is for. So we internally run lead generation webinars with our presenters, which means it's a win-win situation, so they don't get paid. It would also, a lot of our presenters use internal presenters, so we actually had one organisation, and this was quite clever, for the first webinar that they launched, they actually chose to have the CEO hop online and present for them. And that was great. It was a familiar face. He knew what he was doing. There wasn't any reluctance there or anything. So obviously stuff like that is free. And for those people who do use external presenters, most of them do charge, and I think it's quite pricey, to be honest. But once again, it depends on your association and how much you're willing to pay people who present at live events. One of the great things about doing this with as opposed to a live event is you're not necessarily having to pay for the accommodation to house your presenters or their flights or their food or anything like that. They can simply log on at their desk. So if you are considering paying for your presenters, I don't have an actual price point, but think of what you pay people at a live event and then maybe bring it back down and maybe even cut cut it even more because, like I said, they're sitting at home at their own desk. They probably would do a rehearsal, maybe for an hour, a few days before, but nothing as extravagant as what you would have to pay them for a live event.
All right, so one from Luke. Are any demographics resistant or reluctant to accept new technologies or opportunities like this?
I think what you'll find, Luke, and I think, the same goes for social media, what people are tending to find is everyone assumes that maybe the older generation are a little bit more reluctant to use this. And once again, I think it's more association specific more than demographic, so or age, for example. So I think to combat this and to make sure this doesn't happen is making sure there's no software or anything like that for people to download. That really turns people off. So I'm not quite sure if you're dealing with a certain demographic at all, Luke. But what we tend to find is that the easier you can make it for people, it doesn't really matter. We have a lot of people who join. We have a gerontology society as well, and then we have people who may be dealing with online education for, say, 9-year-olds who use this sort of thing. So it's really, really dependent on what you're using, how you communicate how to use it. Make sure how people log on is as easy as possible. Make sure they've got a support line to call if anything goes wrong. And like I said, if they have a bad experience, the chances of them coming back is really, really slim. Doesn't really matter what demographic they're part of.
Great. All right, now I think this is the last question. It's from Mary. How can advertisers be attracted?
Good question. And I think this also goes back to what you're currently doing. So if you currently have sponsors, or maybe you've had a sponsor in the past come to you and they're like, oh, it's a little bit too expensive, go back through the sales tools or that you've been using over the last few years and say, okay, we've got this webinar option now. How would you like this? I don't know if you currently use sponsorship or advertisers, Mary, and how you're currently doing that, but I think it's about finding similar ways to attract them, but maybe targeting those, finding out what in your association, industry specific, how this is going to work, what sort of people you should be targeting. So the AVA, for example, Australian Veterinary Association, they're targeting people who are relevant to them. So they're targeting dog food products, or they're, targeting people that provide vet care or needles for vets or something like that. So something that you're currently doing, and like I said, maybe going back, you may have had someone, I know people, when people contact me, I'm like, oh, it's too expensive, so I could have been a target. Finding people who aren't willing to pay as much, but finding stuff exactly what you're currently doing is a great way to do that as well.
Great. So I think that is all the questions.
Yeah.
We've got it all covered.
Great.
Right, some really great tips there, Sarah, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone for joining today's webinar. We do hope that you gained some valuable insights and found the technology very easy and engaging.
Yeah. And I think once you have your own experience on a webinar, it's much more easier for you to then go and host a webinar, and that makes perfect sense. So, like I said, please complete the exit survey. Keep a lookout for those documents that come through. I'll send also a report that we've done based on Australian research as well. And, feel free to join future webinars that we hold. They're free, and it's great to see you all online. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Bye.